I always thought the hardest part of building a business would be the late nights or the financial risk. I never imagined the biggest threat would be sitting right across the dinner table, quietly plotting to steal everything. When people talk about corporate espionage, they usually picture shadowy figures in suits or hacked servers. They definitely don't picture a 62-year-old mother wearing a floral cardigan, methodically stealing her own daughter's livelihood. She was quietly downloading my entire proprietary client list. And she wasn't doing it for herself. She was doing it to hand my entire company over to her golden child. When I finally realized the depth of her betrayal, I didn't just cry about it or go to therapy. I took them both to court, and I legally dismantled them until there was absolutely nothing left. To understand how we reached such a catastrophic breaking point, you gotta understand the house I grew up in. There was my older brother, Julian, who was the undisputed son my mother's entire universe revolved around. And then there was me. I was the reliable one. I was expected to manage my own life and never ask for help, so all the family's money could be funneled directly into Julian. Julian was a dreamer, which is just a polite way of saying he was wildly entitled and chronically allergic to hard work. He wanted the aesthetic of success without putting in a single drop of sweat. Over the years, my mom funded a string of his failed ventures. There was the luxury sneaker reselling business that ended with a garage full of counterfeit shoes. Then came the disastrous crypto mining phase and an app startup that never actually produced a working app. Every single time he failed, my mother had a ready-made excuse. It was never, ever Julian's fault. When I asked her to co-sign a tiny $500 loan for a greenhouse, she told me to learn financial independence and said no. The very next week, she took out a $50,000 loan to fund Julian's app. I took a completely different path. I craved stability, independence, and a life where I didn't have to rely on anyone. Over 7 grueling years, I built a highly specialized botanical styling company. It was an exhausting business to start. I spent years covered in dirt, hauling 50-pound bags of soil in the back of a beaten-up van. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to negotiate at the flower markets. But eventually, the relentless hard work paid off. I secured a roster of incredibly lucrative long-term maintenance contracts with major tech companies. My business was finally thriving, and I had a beautiful warehouse studio. I had a deep sense of pride in what I had accomplished completely on my own. And that was my first fatal mistake. I let my mother see exactly how well I was doing. I was exhausted, working 14-hour days. My mother stopped by the studio one afternoon, bringing a box of pastries for my staff. She looked around at the bustling warehouse, and she smiled. She told me I looked exhausted. She said she had some free time since she retired and offered to come in a few days a week to help with the paperwork. She said she could handle the bookkeeping. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my business entirely separate from my family. But for the first time ever, she actually wanted to be involved in my life. I agreed to let her help, but I run a strict operation. I insisted on putting her on the payroll as a part-time assistant. I drew up a standard employment contract, which included a very rigorous non-disclosure agreement. I didn't do it because I suspected her. My lawyer required it for anyone accessing my proprietary database. My mother laughed it off, called me a corporate dictator as a joke, and signed the paperwork without reading it. Deceptively peaceful. For the first 3 months, everything was wonderful. She organized the files and brought a warm, maternal energy to the studio. I let my guard down completely, handing her the absolute blueprint to my livelihood. The first red flag popped up in late October. One of my oldest corporate clients just randomly emailed to cancel their contract. No real reason, just some polite corporate fluff about moving in a different direction. 2 weeks later, a luxury apartment complex called to say they weren't renewing. The property manager sounded super awkward on the phone. He finally admitted some new vendor undercut my quote by 30%. I was completely floored. The plant styling world here is tiny, and I know all my competitors. Nobody could offer those rare imports at that price without taking a massive loss. It just didn't add up unless they had my wholesale numbers. I started getting super paranoid, quietly suspecting my own staff. I spent weeks watching my team like a hawk, just feeling sick to my stomach. Then the third cancellation hit. A boutique law firm. That was 3 major contracts gone in a single month. My revenue took an absolute nosedive, and I was panicking. I spent so many sleepless nights agonizing over my spreadsheets. I kept wondering if the market had just shifted overnight and left me in the dust. I was totally exhausted. Through all this insane stress, my mom was playing the perfect sympathetic parent. She'd sit in my office, pat my hand, and tell me business is just full of ups and downs. She kept telling me I just needed to work a little harder and not let it get to me. She was so comforting, always bringing me coffee and acting like my biggest cheerleader. I actually leaned on her for emotional support. I was completely oblivious to the fact that she was the one twisting the knife into my back every single day. While I was running myself ragged trying to save my company, she was sitting right there at her desk, smiling that sweet smile while she quietly dismantled my entire life. It all finally came out by total accident on a Tuesday night. The staff had gone home, and I was alone in the studio, crunching numbers. I was desperately trying to find somewhere to cut costs to survive. I needed this one specific invoice from a wholesale nursery down in Florida. I couldn't find it, so I walked over to my mom's desk. I just wanted to do a quick search in the general admin inbox. I tapped the keyboard to wake up her computer. The screen lit up the dark office, and I swear I wasn't trying to snoop. I really just wanted to find that one missing file. But when the browser opened, it refreshed right into her personal email account. She'd left it logged in. Before I could look away, a subject line caught my eye, and my blood just ran cold. The email was from Julian. The subject line literally said, "Updated pricing sheet for the tech firm pitch." That was the exact same firm that had just dumped me. I just froze. I stared at the screen, and my brain completely short-circuited. Why on earth would Julian be pitching a corporate tech firm? He knew nothing about living architecture. My hand was literally shaking as I clicked on the email. I opened the attachment, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. It confirmed every paranoid fear I had. It was this super professional proposal for living wall installations branded as Julian Design. The pricing table was a carbon copy of my packages, just priced 30% lower. I felt like all the oxygen had just been sucked right out of the room. I could barely breathe. I clicked over to her sent folder and searched Julian's name. Dozens of emails instantly popped up. I pulled up a chair, sat there in the dark warehouse, and read every single one. She had downloaded my entire master client list. She hadn't just given him my pricing. She was actively coaching him on how to destroy my reputation. I read emails where she told Julian exactly what my clients liked. She even wrote a script for him to use, saying my quality was about to drop. Julian wasn't magically finding his footing as an entrepreneur. He was just wearing my skin. He was hijacking the business I had spent 7 grueling years building, and my mother was the one holding the door open for him. I sat in that chair for 4 hours. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. The betrayal was so absolute, it bypassed sadness entirely. It went straight into a cold, terrifying clarity. Every time she patted my hand and told me, business has ups and downs, she knew she was the one pushing me off the cliff. She weaponized my desperate, lifelong desire for a mother's love, all just to fund her golden child's latest delusion. I didn't confront her the next day. In fact, I didn't say a single word. I knew if I confronted her immediately, she'd deny it and delete the evidence. She would somehow spin it to make me look like the crazy, paranoid daughter. I needed to be smart. I needed to be ruthless. Because they weren't just playing family games anymore. They were messing with my livelihood, my employees' salaries, and my future. Over the next 3 days, I quietly and methodically gathered every piece of evidence. I exported the email chains to a secure drive. I made sure I had copies of everything she sent him. I pulled the IT logs from our system. They clearly showed her downloading the database from my secure server, straight onto her personal laptop. There was no way she could deny the digital footprint. I gathered the signed employment contract and the non-disclosure agreement she had so flippantly signed months ago. I documented the lost revenue from the clients she had poached. I was building an airtight case. I built an undeniable paper trail of corporate sabotage. Say, intellectual property theft and breach of contract. I had everything I needed to legally dismantle them. It was time to make my move. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. I called the most aggressive corporate litigation attorney I could find. I needed a total shark, someone who wouldn't pull punches just because we shared DNA. A few days later, I'm sitting in his plush mahogany office. The room was designed to be intimidating. But honestly, I just felt ready. I slid a massive binder of evidence straight across his desk. I sat there in total silence and watched him work. He reviewed the IT logs and emails for 20 straight minutes. He didn't say a single word. I could see the realization dawning on him. When he finally looked up, his expression was dead serious. He asked if I understood what this lawsuit would do. He warned me they weren't just getting a warning. With this evidence, they'd probably lose absolutely everything. I didn't blink. I didn't feel an ounce of pity or hesitation. I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was completely steady. I told him to draft the papers. The confrontation happened exactly a week later. I wasn't going to invite her to my office to talk. Instead, I drove straight to her house on a Sunday. Julian's car was in the driveway. Perfect. I walked through the front door without even knocking. I stepped right into the kitchen. And there they were. Julian and my mother were sitting at the table, laughing over coffee like a picture-perfect family. When my mother finally noticed me, her face lit up. She flashed me that fake, warm smile she always used. It was her go-to move to disarm people. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. She cheerfully said she didn't know I was coming by. Then she immediately twisted the knife. She said she was just telling Julian how proud she was. Proud of his new business taking off. I didn't smile back. I didn't say a single word of greeting. I just walked right up to the edge of the table, holding the heavy manila envelope, ready to drop a bomb on their delusion. I didn't even hesitate.
I just slammed that thick manila envelope right down on the table.
It landed right in front of her coffee cup with this heavy thud.
My mother actually jumped a little bit.
That fake, warm smile of hers finally started to crack.
She looked down at the envelope and asked me what it was. I kept my voice completely steady.
I looked her dead in the eye and told her it was a lawsuit. I said they were both being sued for breach of contract and corporate sabotage. I didn't stop there either.
I told her she was officially locked out of all my systems and fired, effective immediately. I let her know she had exactly 21 days to respond to my lawyer.
The silence that fell over that kitchen was absolutely deafening. Julian just sat there, frozen in his chair.
He was staring at the envelope like it was a live explosive. My mother's hands actually started to shake.
She slowly opened the flap and pulled out the legal documents. Her eyes just widened in absolute horror as she read the cover page. Suddenly, Julian snapped out of his little trance. He stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floor.
He looked completely pale and panicked.
He just started screaming at me. He was demanding to know if I was completely out of my mind. He actually had the nerve to ask how I could possibly sue my own family.
I didn't even flinch.
I just looked at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. I looked him right in the eye and told him we weren't family. I called him exactly what he was. I told him he was a parasite who couldn't build a successful business to save his life. So he just had our mother steal mine instead. My mother immediately burst into tears. But they weren't tears of guilt or remorse. They were tears of wild, unhinged indignation. She clutched the legal papers to her chest and sobbed. She screamed that she was my mother and everything in this family belonged to all of us. She said I had so much and Julian had been struggling for years. She demanded to know why I couldn't just share. She actually called me incredibly selfish. I felt this bizarre, overwhelming urge to just laugh. The sheer, staggering delusion of her words was almost impossible to process. She really believed she was the victim here.
It was honestly mind-blowing.
I looked right at her and said she didn't ask me to share. I told her she infiltrated my company and stole my proprietary data. She actively tried to bankrupt me. Also, her precious golden boy could play pretend CEO. I reminded her about the non-disclosure agreement she signed. I made it very clear that it was a legally binding contract. Contract that she willingly and maliciously broke. There was no talking her way out of this one. She shrieked that she didn't even read the paper. She claimed I forced her to sign it. She yelled that she didn't need a contract to help her own daughter. The mental gymnastics were just astounding. I leaned in close across the table. I dropped my voice and looked her dead in the eye. I told her she wasn't helping me. I told her she was hunting me. Then I turned my attention back to Julian. He was sitting there looking pale and completely panicked. I casually mentioned that I had called my wholesale suppliers, the exact same ones my mother gave him the account numbers for. I told him I informed them he was committing corporate fraud. His address was officially flagged in their system. He'd have to pay full retail prices from now on. I wished him luck keeping those impossible profit margins he promised my clients. Julian looked like he was literally going to vomit. He knew that without my discounts, his cheaper pricing model was dead. It was going to put him in massive, immediate debt. If he couldn't deliver, those clients were going to sue him next. My mom stepped toward me, her face completely red with rage. She started screaming that I was destroying my brother's life. She ordered me to drop the lawsuit right then and there. She told me if I didn't drop it, I was no longer part of the family.
She swore she'd never speak to me again. It was the exact same threat she used my whole childhood to keep me in line. She expected me to panic and beg for her love. But looking at her right then, seeing the ugly truth of who she really was, all I felt was this overwhelming, beautiful sense of relief. I just looked at her and asked, "Promise?"
I didn't even wait for an answer.
I turned around and walked straight out the front door.
I left them sitting in that kitchen with the mess they made.
And I never stepped foot in that house again. The legal battle that followed was brutal, but totally one-sided. My attorney was an absolute shark, and our evidence was bulletproof. My mom and Julian had to hire this cheap, desperate lawyer who was completely out of his depth. During discovery, things got even worse when we deposed my mother. My lawyer handed her printouts of her own emails. He made her read them out loud for the court reporter. She had to read the exact lines where she coached Julian to badmouth my business. She tried crying, playing the confused old lady who didn't understand tech. But my lawyer didn't care because her emails were way too calculated. Then we subpoenaed Julian's records and found something massive. He actually forged my signature on a vendor form to get a huge line of credit. That single document turned this from a civil lawsuit straight into criminal fraud. My lawyer used that forgery to force a total surrender. They had absolutely no defense, so they settled before trial. Julian was forced to dissolve his company immediately. He had to surrender every single client contract right back to me. The settlement terms were financially devastating for them. My mom was held personally liable for the breach of contract and my lost revenue. To pay the damages, she had to drain her retirement savings. She even had to take out a massive second mortgage on her house. Julian had already racked up thousands in debt trying to fulfill the contracts he stole. Without my supplier discounts, he couldn't even pay his share of the settlement. He declared bankruptcy less than 8 months later. The poetic justice of the whole thing was honestly cinematic. The corporate clients Julian stole came crawling back to me almost immediately. Turns out, having a stolen spreadsheet doesn't magically give you the skill to keep rare plants alive. He overwatered the massive living walls at the tech firm, causing thousands in root rot and water damage. The luxury apartment complex fired him after just 3 weeks. His installations looked cheap, unkempt, and started dying almost immediately. I graciously agreed to take them all back as clients. But I let them know my rates had increased by 15% to cover the damage he caused. Every single one of them paid it without a single complaint. It's been 4 years since I walked out of my mother's kitchen. My business has tripled in size. I have a bigger warehouse, more vans, and a team of loyal employees I actually trust. I'm entirely financially secure. I hear updates about them occasionally. Julian's working a minimum wage retail job, still living in my mother's basement. My mother is working as a grocery store cashier just to pay off her second mortgage, still telling anyone who will listen about her cruel, heartless daughter. People often ask me if I feel guilty. They say things like, "But she's your mother," or "Family is everything." They act like biology is a free pass for abuse. Like sharing DNA means you have to politely stand still while someone drains the life out of you. But I don't feel guilty, not even for a fraction of a second. The truth is, my mother didn't see me as a daughter. She saw me as a resource. She thought my lifelong need for her love would blind me to the knife in my back. She wildly underestimated me. She forgot I succeeded because I learned early on that I could only rely on myself. She forced me to build my own armor. And then she was shocked when she couldn't pierce it. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is stop trying to win the love of people committed to misunderstanding you. I lost a mother and a brother, But I bought back my sanity, my business, and my self-respect. And honestly, that was the best trade I've ever made.